military, I was going to be in the unit that is kind of the military police kind of section of the Canadian Armed Forces. But because I was an officer, that area is called a security officer. And for the first probably 18 months of my training, joining the military, it's all training. You have to learn how to get the basic skills of being a member of the Canadian Armed Forces. You learn how to march, you learn how to iron your pants, you learn how to shine your shoes, how to salute, how to give a command, how to follow orders, how to be a soldier in many respects, the traditions of the military. And then you have other training and you become what you're setting out to be as a professional aspect of the Canadian Armed Forces. For me, I was going to be a security officer, and I did really well in that area. I finished at the top of my class, and to acknowledge how I'd been doing in that training, the military posted me to a unit known as the Special Investigations Unit. As far as I was told, I was the second female officer ever to be posted to this unit. So that was a prestigious thing. They were acknowledging how I was doing. The Special Investigations Unit was tasked with investigating the most serious forms of crime in the military. They were also tasked with investigating allegations of homosexuality. So, in a certain way, the left hand and the right hand of the military didn't know what was happening, and they didn't talk to each other. My career advancement, HR people were posting me to acknowledge how I was doing. They thought I'd be a good fit. On the other hand, what I was soon to realize is I was also under investigation by the SIU because of my sexual orientation. It's a hard position to get posted to a unit that you know is going to be looking at you. My boss called me one day and told me to gather my things, that we were flying from Toronto, where I was posted at the base, to Ottawa to conduct an investigation. I grabbed my things. I had very little, I didn't really have files in my cabinets back then. There wasn't much to gather, but I did. And we went to towards the Toronto airport in the undercover SIU K car. And I was wearing civilian clothes because that's how we dressed in the SIU. We got close to the airport, but then my boss turned into the hotel strip by the airport. And he just said, "Follow me. There are some people I need you to talk to." He took me to the 8th floor of what was then the Constellation Hotel. And he left me at the threshold of that door on the 8th floor. The door opened. There were 2 military police officers in civilian clothes. And he just said, "Go with them." And then he left and I went inside, and I knew I was in big, big trouble. And I had a pretty good idea of why. I was in that particular interrogation for 2 days in the hotel room. It was pretty awful, and it's something I remember a lot about to this day. It's a time that stayed with me. They talked to me about my loyalty to my country, which is deep and assured and not in doubt in any way. I was prepared to give my life for Canada, but the fact that I'm gay seemed to negate all of that in their mind. It's a bizarre idea for me. But they demanded that I tell them my sexual orientation, that I clarify the nature of my relationship with this other person. And I lied about it all. I didn't want to get kicked out of the military. And they asked me to name names. They asked me to take a polygraph test. I said no. But after I left that hotel room, I became subjected to much more intense interrogations, many more times, sometimes in hotel rooms, sometimes just really cruel behavior in my workplace by my boss. And it was unrelenting, and I was breaking. I was a young person. They were so cruel. And the pressure and the stress, the reduction of you as a person, you know, is something that stays with you. While I was waiting to be released from the military, I went to hear Svend Robinson speak. Svend is Canada's first openly gay member of parliament, and he was talking about his experiences at what is now Ryerson University. And when I heard him speak, I was amazed that someone could be so open and so public and so determined to kind of help make things better for a lot of other people. And at the end, I lined up to speak with him. You know, when people line up to speak to the speaker at the end of an event, and I told him who I was, that I was still in the military, and that I was in, I think I used the words, I'm in a lot of trouble. And I'm about to be kicked out. And he said, I can help you. Please contact me. He asked me for my name. I said I'd contact him. But the truth was, I was pretty intimidated to contact a member of parliament. I can't believe that. And I didn't follow up. But a short time later, I was in the barracks at Canadian Armed Forces Base, Toronto, and the common phone rang on my floor, and the call went out, Douglas, phone for you. And I ran down to the phone and I answered it, Lieutenant Douglas speaking, and he said, why didn't you call me? It's Svend Robinson. I said I could help you. And that started a journey for me to take on a fight against the Canadian Armed Forces, to seek legal justice and to try to end the ridiculous, discriminatory, damaging policy that that shamed homosexuals, that shamed people just like me, and was so profoundly wrong. So he introduced me to my lawyer, Clayton Ruby, and Harriet Sachs, and I took on the case to fight the Canadian military at that point. It started a battle against the military that would bring them to court and require them to explain why they were doing what they were doing and to justify it. And just as we were going towards a 3-week trial in the Federal Court of Canada, they said they wanted to settle because there was no way they could justify it. It's not justifiable. And it certainly wasn't justifiable in the context of Canada's rather new at the time Charter of Rights and Freedoms. When all of this was happening, I had no idea about the scope and scale of what we now know is the LGBT Purge. I thought I was pretty alone. Of course, you could say, well, you knew that investigations were being conducted. I was still really new about all of this. And I didn't have any idea about the scale of it. I just felt very alone back then. And I remember I did an interview on CBC radio with a very famous radio host at the time, Peter Zosky. And he said, well, what about the others? Or something like that. I'm deep in my memory here, and I said, well, I don't know. Are there others? Like, I don't know. I think I'm by myself. And then it was only many years or even decades later that I fully appreciated the scale and scope of what the government had done. And it's still shocking. Like, it's hard to believe that the government ruined the lives of so many, or at the very least, harmed people, diminished them, and left many scarred for life. It's a pretty shameful period in Canadian history. You know, it's hard to think about legacy, because that would mean that I peaked in about 1992, when the lawsuit I brought against the military was successful. I know I changed important policy, and I've always been grateful to those who have expressed their appreciation to me for that. But really, I know I stand on the shoulders of many who tried to get justice before me and couldn't. In some ways, my case just came up at the right time. I had good facts to bring forward, and the time was right for big change back then. But I think one of the things I'm most proud of is that I've never stopped. I've fought for over 30 years for others, and once you experience discrimination firsthand, I think it's pretty hard to not do something. It's an honor to be a leader in any movement. I do play a leadership role in many ways now for LGBT Purge survivors, as do several others, but certainly I think my own role as executive director of the Purge Fund means that I need to take on the responsibility of telling the story of the LGBT Purge. I need to honor those who, like me, experienced a very, very difficult time, and work for memorializing that time, but seeking reconciliation. There's more to do. There's more justice to be sought, and there's more memories to be captured. So part of this is telling our stories again, capturing the stories as we're now in our 50s, 60s, 70s, and sharing with others what happened to us in the past, because it wasn't a good time back then. Well, the exciting thing about the work we're doing now with the LGBT Purge Fund is that it does pursue the thread of reconciliation and memorialization. We're building the LGBTQ2+ National Monument to not only the Purge, but the much broader story and bigger story of discrimination against the LGBTQ2 community in Canada. We're going to tell the story at the Canadian Museum for Human Rights as well. We're collecting historical documents. That's another project that we're working on that will actually be the historical records that kind of help us understand, how did this thing happen in the first place? If we don't have those documents, sometimes people don't believe it, because the story itself is almost unimaginable, given that we can often think of Canada as not having these kinds of histories. But we do, and we have to have the proof that they did. And then finally, we're working with the Canadian federal government to help them be a better employer, to create better workspace, to create better training, to make sure that it's authentic inclusion and diversity. And we're helping them too. The other thing that I'm really honored to say is that we give out grants to the community to help them tell the stories and other things about, what happened in the Purge. Maybe it's a piece of art, maybe it's a musical composition, maybe it's a book, maybe it's an academic kind of focused grant. These are the kinds of things that we're now able to do, and we have the money to do it because of those who lived through the LGBT Purge, and for those who didn't live long enough to see justice. we have some funds that are symbolic of what they would have received in the class action lawsuit. So it's like a trust or a sacred trust in many ways, to use those funds wisely to tell the story and ensure what happened in the LGBT purge is never forgotten. It's a pretty big honor and responsibility to do that work. But sometimes, most of the time, it feels like I'm in exactly the right role and place and time for me to do this work with others and to lift up the stories, um, and help more people understand what happened in the LGBT purge.